right, greetings everybody. My name is Tom Kiefer. I'm the editor of the magazine and website Dispensing Freedom, and I'd like to welcome you to the event that we're holding here on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The event concerns the topic of the Indigenous right to cannabis, and we're holding this meeting as a way to make the people of Ottawa aware of the efforts that are being undertaken by Medicine Wheel Natural Healing, which has opened a new dispensary in downtown Ottawa at 196 Beechwood Avenue. And we're going to hear from a number of experts, people who are, we're going to hear from lawyer Jack Lloyd, who is one of the top constitutional lawyers in Canada. Unfortunately, he had a trial that went on a little too long, and we're going to be playing a video message from him to start the meeting. And after that, we're going to hear from former National Chief Delbert Riley, who was the president of the National Indian Brotherhood at the time of the constitutional debates and restructuring in the early 1980s. And so he's responsible for putting in sections 25 and 35 in the Canadian Constitution, which entrench Aboriginal and treaty rights. Following that, we'll hear from Rob Stevenson, who is the founder of Medicine Wheel Natural Healing in Alderville First Nation. And then we'll hear from Anthony John Tenasco, spokesperson for the Medicine Wheel Natural Healing in Ottawa. Okay, so having said, and then we'll have a question and answer period. So I will now put the video with Jack on.
My name is Jack Lloyd. I'm a constitutional lawyer specializing largely in cannabis and psychedelics related issues, in particular medical access to these substances. And I also have significant litigation ongoing involving Indigenous rights as they relate to cannabis. Well, certainly the legal logic comes from a case originating in British Columbia, dealing with what amounts to Indigenous rights as expressed off, quote unquote, the reserve. And that's a case called Chilcotin. And ultimately, that was years of litigation, but ultimately the BC Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada have affirmed that Indigenous rights can and do exist off the reserve. They're not delineated by reserve boundaries. They're delineated by traditional territories upon which those rights were exercised prior to European invasion of North America, or what's sometimes referred to as pre-contact exercising of rights. And so the underlying legal arguments associated with Indigenous cannabis dispensaries operating off reserve is very obviously tied to the exercise of those sui generis rights. And ultimately, it's a legal issue that needs to be determined ultimately by a court, but for which a significant number of Indigenous peoples are asserting those rights off reserve on the basis that their people have been engaging in trade off reserve and on all of their unceded land and traditional territories since time immemorial. So that's the big picture view of the legal argument. There are associated arguments connected to what's sometimes called economic genocide and trade rights that have been previously outlined by appellate courts across Canada. There are two ways of viewing it. One is that cannabis constitutes a trade like any other in which Indigenous peoples may engage. And another focuses on a highly important and technical assessment of the Indigenous relationship with the cannabis plant historically. which is really not reflected in the Indian Act, which is a problem in and of itself. But ultimately, a historical relationship with the plant itself that predates European invasion, and as such, that history has never been placed before the courts, and certainly has been largely disregarded by every branch of government, frankly, in a very aggressively myopic way. So that's kind of the slightly tighter view of this sui generis right associated with trade in cannabis and trade in general, in particular with certain psychedelic substances that are known to be deeply connected with certain Indigenous religious rituals. Those are already effectively not prohibited for those purposes. But the broader argument regarding Indigenous health and Indigenous health decision making is very strong. So the legislation governing certainly access to medical cannabis has now been struck down as unconstitutional twice because of a lack of in-person access. And after those two decisions, one in Alberta and the other in Saskatchewan, after those decisions, the federal government never changed the medical cannabis program. And so it's left, and they certainly never consulted with any First Nations peoples about it. And so the argument is quite strong, because when you speak with Indigenous people and Indigenous health experts, they affirm that non-in-person medical advice access is not in line with traditional values held by Indigenous peoples. So the problems that have been outlined with the federal regime in other cases are even worse for Indigenous peoples. Particularly, often telemedicine is touted as a solution for certain remote communities, but my submission is that overregulation for certain issues actually is counterproductive, and in my view amounts to a serious violation of Section 7 of the Charter. Really what the province and the federal government and the municipal government are doing is trying to pass the buck on this issue ultimately. So the feds are saying, look, this fits squarely into the constitutional head of power attributed to the provinces, which is Section 92 sub 13 of the Constitution Act. But my submission is that that's really an unfair characterization, because it's really regulated pursuant to the criminal law power, which is indeed federal. But in any event, the only way that a final determination on this is going to happen is if we get some sort of legislative guidance, which frankly is unlikely, although Health Canada is engaging in a current request for comments from the public. But beyond that, the legislative and executive branches of government are unlikely to proffer any guidance. It's really going to be the judicial branch of government that's going to provide that. So there will be a case, and it remains to be seen. The courts are going to have to provide us with guidance on this, whether by way of a reference, which is always possible, which is basically when we pose a legal question to a judge. But in my view, because there's a charter violation associated with this, it really is better suited for the factual matrix associated with a trial, so that there's an evidentiary foundation for the assertions being made by Indigenous peoples, as well as the Crown. I don't think the Crown is entitled to say that they consulted with First Nations people about any of this. There's been some late attempts to engage in consultation, but it is too little too late. So in my view, that there has been a failure on the government's obligation obligation or duty to consult. And in any event, I think it's unlikely that band councils en masse agree with what most people are asserting in regards to their rights. So there's just a multiple levels of government, federal, provincial, municipal, and band council, all in the mix, with ultimately a court is going to have to give us an answer eventually. So from a regulatory perspective, the cannabis regulations and the Excise Act and various provincial tax acts have resulted in a situation where cannabis is being taxed at an incredibly high rate. And it's resulting in a situation in which it's very, very difficult for licensed retailers and licensed federally licensed producers and processors, et cetera, to engage profitably in the industry. And so certainly you've seen massive devaluations of publicly traded companies, and furthermore, really deep problems at an industry-wide level, in that no one is able to make a profit as a consequence of these regulations. And so it's in that context that a significant number of Indigenous producers and retailers that have existed for many years on reserve are also now in operation, in some instances off reserve, hoping, I assume, to bring a test case for the purposes of challenging these issues. The charter does not necessarily protect economic rights, and in some ways it may be that that was ultimately the federal government's goal, was to prevent any more findings of unconstitutionality associated with the federal regime. But the argument in relation to this sui generis right held by Indigenous peoples, especially on their traditional lands, which in their submission are not ceded and or certainly not validly ceded, that those arguments are very potent. So from a big picture perspective, the regulated industry is really struggling, and the Indigenous industry is providing in some ways a model for a healthier and more robust cannabis industry, and certainly one that is more in line with the Crown's duty to consult with First Nations people and the historical guardianship that was supposed to be in place since the Royal Proclamation of 1763 was signed. So I think, in a sense, the failure to consult with First Nations peoples has resulted in First Nations peoples doing it better than the federal government and provincial governments have been able to do. And that's the situation that we're in now. You can just call my office if you want. I'm not a super duper techie person. I have a website, but certainly I'm always happy to represent anyone that's being faced with nasty, prohibitive laws associated with cannabis, or that don't allow an Indigenous person to properly exercise their rights in a fulsome manner. So if anyone wants to speak with me, you can give me a call. My phone number is 647-235-3972.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what Jack said, but there's so much more to all of this that I think this afternoon, hopefully I can give people here a bit of a little better education as to where things are at. Now, probably the most important thing is the fact that Section 25 and 35 has been constitutionalized, and it protects your Aboriginal treaty rights. Okay, but a problem we have is we haven't done enough work yet to fully determine exactly what's all involved in these rights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of give you an idea of some of the things out there that you have to start looking at to come up with a booklet that or some document that describes exactly what rights you have for your First Nation. Now, there's a lot of things that affect your rights. And I should give you a little background of myself first. I think I spent about 9 years in prison. I was captured at 6 years old by the RCMP and thrown in residential school. And I was subjected to the most brutal treatment anybody could imagine. And you know, sometimes I can't tell people because it was just so horrific. But I explained it in the book here. And incidentally, this book is going to be the Bible on Aboriginal treaty rights probably for the next 100 years. So I expect probably in a few years everyone will have a copy of it. But I was very thorough. And the reason 35 and 25 got in was, actually there's 2 other sections got in as well, was at the time, Canada was discussing, well, they were going to patriate the Constitution. And a problem they had was, well, you got the treaties here. How do we mesh the two, and how does the government of Canada still come on top of the rights of Indians on all of this? Well, what they did is up until I'd say even 1860, the federal government was really in the process of implementing the Royal Proclamation. And I think they had a law in place in 1850 called the Indian Protection Act. Now, the context of this is not like the Indian Act. This was, in fact, if anybody moved on to, because there's no reserves around, if anybody moved on to where Indians were situated, where they may have had families or a group of families there, sometimes the settlers would come in and shove them out and take over their land, or try to charge them tax. So the First Nations had this, the government, the British government imposed this law, this Indian Protection Act. But that's all it was. It wasn't like the Indian Act, so you can't compare the two. But the beauty of it in terms of rights was that it also described a lot of rights that First Nations had. And then, in 1854, another Royal Proclamation came along, and it was called the Rowan Proclamation. And it was trying to fix some of the reserve border problems that the 1850 Robinson-Huron Treaty created. I'm an expert on Aboriginal treaty rights. I probably solved maybe 60 or so land claims. So, and I'm also a historian, so I know history inside out. And so in 1854, this proclamation came about, and it recognized things like in all of Upper Canada, First Nations are tax-free, totally tax-free. Okay, you haven't seen it yet because this document has been hidden for years. We only brought it out within the last 2 years, and I analyzed it for a legal firm. And but essentially, one of the big values of it is that it recognized Aboriginal rights that were in place at the time. Now, these Aboriginal rights would apply to all First Nations all across Canada. So we're way behind in getting a lot of this information out yet, but that's one very important point. And as well, probably the important thing was the treaties that were in place or made at that time were international documents. These are international, and each side has its own, I guess, its own lawmaking ways in place, and as did the First Nations. They may not call it laws, but they had a system in place, and this is now under the Royal Proclamation. And here's something interesting about the Royal Proclamation. It didn't create any rights. It only recognized the rights that the First Nation people already had. So it couldn't change anything, nor could the 1854 Rowan Proclamation. Didn't change anything. It just recognized things. And because it recognized these things, these are important. And probably the real problem arose. This would have been nice if things could have continued on that way, but it didn't. Along came this group of prune-faced, grizzled old characters who didn't have didn't even have an invitation over here. They sat down and created the BNA Act. Now, there's some interesting things about the BNA Act. When it was originally passed in 1867, Britain passed it for the benefit of its colony. See, Canada was never a real country. It was always a colony. So none of your rights can be overridden by the BNA Act. Well, this is my position. And in my mind, it's very solid. And so which leaves us to the development of the Indian Act. The Indian Act was developed so that these grizzled old colonial Caucasoids, as I call them, because there were no such thing as Canadian, so that they could get control of your lands and your rights without ever telling you. Because we didn't have anybody that were lawyers, or all we had was our treaties and what those treaties meant. But that's solid. And today we still have to figure out a lot of what our rights are in those treaties. You know, I could do it, but take me a little while. But it's there, and so this. Okay, with the Indian Act, of course, it's a crazy thing, and there's so many gray areas in it that it's crazy. And I'll just say a few. For one thing, it recognizes us as Indians. Now, I don't come from India, and I don't think anyone people come from India. So what were they trying to do? Okay, and here's another complication. Well, if you were recognized as an Indian, how can you be a Canadian? And this is a problem they have. You can't be a Canadian. Hey, Canadians have no rights on your res, do they? So for the government to call us Canadian is a bunch of nonsense. Our nationhood is intact, and that's where we have to sort of begin our development. It's from that nationhood aspect. You're not Canadian, but hey, we've got these colonial people that are here, we're not going to get rid of them, and they're not going to get rid of us. So somehow we got to work together. And my position has always been that I'm not out to destroy Canada, but I want to fix what the hell's wrong there. And racism is the worst damn thing that could have happened to us. That's what I'm out to fix. And but in the meantime, I'm going to do as much as I can for our people so that we can get out of the forced poverty we're in, the concentration camps that the reserves became, and they're real concentration camps for all those reserves in the north, because you got no chance at doing anything there, because they crowded everybody into little villages, so their independence, their way of life was all gone. And then they come up with nothing for them except, well, social assistance here. And you got all these social problems that follow. And the Indian Act has to go. We can work together as different nations in Canada, but the most important thing, I think, is you identify from the aspect of your nationhood. I don't know if I can add too much more to that, but hey, guys, this is going to be the Bible for the next 100 years. There's nothing else like it. There's only one shot at putting Section 35 and 25 in a Constitution. And I had to go to England. I opened a shop in England, or I opened an office there. And I lobbied around the world. And I had the government come running to me and say, Mr. Riley, we will give you your protection if you will close your office in England. This Christian comes to me. Hey, the other thing he did too, he come to me, he says, hey, if you will take the Métis out of there, we'd be really happy. So he wanted me to agree to take the Métis out of there. I said, nope. I promised him that all three organizations would stay in there. But of course the Métis have a problem because they never had any definition of who they were. But the name, I figured, well, hey, it's not going to hurt to keep the name in there. And whatever the way they can develop from that, it's going to be up to them. And of course they're rather aggressive today. They're doing their own thing. But so that's how the Métis got in there as well. And it was actually fun doing the committee constitutional discussions, because I'm sitting there with 30 committee members who are all racist as hell, all believe that the Indian Act was there to stay, and that they can continue on with their racism. But that was the kind of thing I had to face when I was in there. And I had to, you get questions like, well, how come you Indians can't be just like us? And sort of, is there any reason? So I looked at the guy and said, well, I says, why don't you tell that to the French people? And these were all European Caucasoid members of Parliament. And don't mind me calling them, Caucasoid is the actual good technical name for them, because they call me an Indian, so I call them Caucasoids. And that's technically that's correct. Colonial Caucasoids. But it's the only place, that and this is where we get all our racism from, is these colonial Caucasoids. And of course, because we don't have any representation in either government, provincial or federal, oh yeah, they allow you to vote, don't they? Vote for who? Yeah. Some character of one of the parties appointed, it'll never come to your community anyway, or if he's got conflicts with where he comes from and the Indians, he says, of course, who's going to win the conflict. But it's been an uphill struggle, but I think we're winning. And there's one more very important thing I want to mention, and that has to do with the current chiefs and councils on that are under the Indian Act. So they're Indian Act chiefs and councils. And the first, and of course, the Prime Minister calls them Canadians. But they're essentially John A. Macdonald chiefs and councils. And he never gives them any authority. Then, 1892, he puts in place the chiefs and councils from under the Indian Act. And so those Indian Act chiefs and councils, he didn't trust them any more than the old traditional chiefs and councils, so he didn't give them any power. So today's chiefs and councils are, of course, they get a lot of program dollars in, so they're pretty wealthy. Of course, their doors are getting locked more and more all over the place. But it presents a huge problem because I'm just getting the truth out there to a lot of them that never realized, shit, they ain't got no more authority than the local sewing club. You know? And they think they have Aboriginal treaty rights. They actually do as an individual, but not as the instrument in the Indian Act. They're John A. Macdonald, Chief and Council. So we've got a lot of things to overcome, and right now I'm doing a lot of work. Sometimes I have to go to court because of my expertise in Aboriginal treaty rights. People have asked; they don't want the lawyers out there; they want me. So I go and we just had a good case last Friday. I had a case in Nova Scotia, and DFO had taken this fisherman. He took his truck for 2 years, took his nets, and didn't have a legitimate reason even to stop him. And finally come on board, but we took him to task and said, well, hey, these are all the problems you face. This is what the law is. And but the most powerful thing that was there was his treaty. Said, hey, his treaty is protected by Section 35, and how do you get around that? So last Friday they returned his truck and his nets, and I think next time I go to court with them, I believe they're going to throw it out. I don't think they want to face me, so I'm going to tear them apart, especially those officers. But anyway, okay, I'm going to kind of leave it at that. I know you're going to have a lot of questions, and I want you to, I'll stay here and answer all your questions. But when you get a chance, you're going to have to read the book. When people pick it up, they can't put it down. And it's written by 2 Indians, my son and I. No ghostwriter in it. But that's 50 years of experience in this whole area of land claims, treaty rights.
Okay, first I want to thank Chief Riley here. He's a wealth of knowledge, and because of his fight for Indigenous rights, he's got Section 25 and 35 in that Constitution, which really protects us as Indigenous people. I'd like to thank AJ, the owner of Medicine Wheel Vanier, and Tom for putting this together. So just to introduce myself, Rob Stevenson. I'm from the beautiful community of Alderville First Nation. It's on the south shore of Rice Lake, and I was the first Anishinaabe dispensary to open in all of Canada. We kind of became a ground zero next to Tyendinaga. But I kind of want to lead into a segue, and Tom kind of reminded me of this when I got here. I was here many years ago with Tom, actually, helping me out, and we were here for the National Indigenous Cannabis and Hemp Conference. And it was the first one here, and we had a dignitary here, we'll call him Minister Blair. And when he came out to do his speech, he acknowledged, that he was on the lands of the Algonquin people, and was kind of showing respect that way. So at the end of that meeting, there was a question period, and I got up and asked him point blank. I said, "You acknowledge that you're on Algonquin lands." I said, "Do you acknowledge that they have the right to meaningful control over their natural plant-based medicines?" And he said yes. And to me, that was an important moment. I've watched that video multiple times. What is kind of interesting is here we are again, and we've done it. We've opened up the first medicine wheel off reserve, the first Indigenous store in Ottawa. And we're hoping we can hold them accountable to the words that they acknowledge that we have the right to control this natural plant-based medicine in a way that fits within our cultures and values. And we look at this plant as a medicine. We don't see it as a recreational drug. And these are some of the barriers that we've been facing with the lack of consultation. When you have a group of people deciding how other people should live and try to govern their lives, but the values and traditions don't align, you have a lot of issues that get created. And I want to take, for an example, you have an apple. You take this to most people and you say, what is the value of this apple? And they'll look at it and they'll be like, okay, $2, I don't even know what an apple's worth right now. But they put a price value on it. And when you go to an Indigenous person, you ask them what the value of that apple is, and they'll tell you the value of that apple is, if I eat this apple, I get to live another day. Values and traditions don't always align. That doesn't mean we can't work together. That doesn't mean we have to collide head on. It just means that we have to work and respect each other's ways of living. This is what reconciliation is. And when I first got into this industry, I'm still learning a lot about my culture. But the issue that I saw with most reserves and with most people, and we see it, is the issue is colonization. It's created multi-generational trauma. It's created residential schools, and that has had a very negative impact on us. And we have to do meaningful things to be able to turn that around so we can live the lives that we need to live. But what is interesting is that sovereignty and reconciliation have a perfectly negative relationship with colonization. The more we assert our sovereignty, the more that people reconcile with us, the stronger those get and the weaker colonization gets. And that's ultimately what we got to be striving for. And AJ is taking that first step, and he is doing that. He's opened up a dispensary off reserve, following our traditions and cultures, selling it as a medicine, helping people, educating people, and doing it in a way that is respectful, that is safe. All the product is tested, it's clean, and it's Indigenous. The profits are going back to Indigenous people to help Indigenous communities. So there's been a lot of economic prosperity from these Indigenous dispensaries opening up on reserve and now off reserve. It's creating, nation-to-nation trading, which I think is really important. A lot of the deals that are made, there's no exchange of money. It's an exchange of product, just like how we used to do. So when I first started Medicine Wheel, Indigenous cannabis on the forefront was very new. So we had to look at ways to legitimize what we're doing. We had to prove to ourselves, to our own communities, and to surrounding communities, the non-Indigenous communities, that we can play in this game, that we can do it in a respectful and safe way. So what we did is we created a laboratory called Red Feather Labs, and this is where all our product goes through to get testing. So it's tested for potency, THC, CBD, different cannabinoids, terpene profiles, heavy metals, residual solvents, pesticides, molds. We're looking for all those things when we're testing products. And to be honest with you, about 30% of the flower that comes through our lab does not pass. That's how high our standards are. We hold a higher standard than what Health Canada is actually holding for their products. And then what we do is we also validate our results by sending them to the products at different labs to test them as well. So when you see a lab result on one of the Medicine Wheel products or one of the Indigenous products that we sell, you could take it to the bank that's what it tests at. If you can take it to any other lab and they're going to get very similar test results. We've worked towards child-proof packaging. So all of our packaging is child-proof, so it's safe. Smell-proof, every customer leaves with an exit bag like this. And you know, what it's doing as well is people that are coming into these stores, and I'm sure Anthony's already seeing it with his, is that we're introducing non-natives to our Indigenous culture every time they come into our stores. We can educate them, we can teach them a little bit more about our cultures. You know, we have Indigenous words of the days we can post up, and we get our staff using them. So it's a real chance to slowly try to, I guess, get people to understand more of the cultures and traditions of natives and start to bridge that gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous. It shouldn't be an us versus them. It's okay, there were some issues in the past, how do we fix this? How do we work together? By lack of consultation, in my view, is a big step backwards. Now it's created a us versus them as far as Indigenous dispensaries and the OCS stores in Ontario. And it shouldn't have been like that. But how can an Indigenous community get into cannabis doing it the OCS way when there is zero benefit for us? Most Indigenous communities are in rural areas, so you got to drive to them. What's the benefit of driving to an Indigenous community if you can get the very same products, you know, in your own same community? It doesn't make sense. There was absolutely no thought for Indigenous when this happened. So by doing this, we're stepping out of that box, and we are asserting our sovereignty, but we're doing it in a respectful way that you know, reflects our values. So you know, that's basically what Medicine Wheel has been focusing on, and it's doing it all with integrity. We try to educate. Medicine Wheel has our own, what we call the Medicine Wheel University. It's an intensive training program that covers from basically seed to sale of cannabis. And all of our staff get educated on that. We've created an ailment and treatment guide, which has been very popular. There's been over 60,000 copies printed. This is our last copy right here, and we're about to release a new and updated version as well that is a lot more detailed. We've created educational books. This is all done in-house. This is Little Robbie Ladybug and the Green Meshkiki Plant. So what this book's for is educating youth about cannabis, you know, and one of my mentors who's since passed that first got me into cannabis used to say a little worms with too much can burn. Same with cannabis, you know, we got to be smart with it. We got to educate our kids and practice it in a safe way. And then we created books for, you know, the young teens. Then we created a book for older teens. And then we have another one, which I didn't bring, is a fun one for seniors. And it's a Christmas book based on the 12 Days of Christmas. And again, it's all based around education. So I think it's been very good. We've definitely seen a slowing in sales with all the competition around us now. But what I'm trying to really promote is it's not us against them. It's us just trying to do the best for what we can for our own communities, for our own people, and again, doing it in a way that's good for us. But what we're seeing is now an uptick in Indigenous getting involved in cannabis. There's all kinds of Indigenous brands out there, Creator's Choice, Jeed, Muckwa, Trudeau's, ICR, Level Up, Chillin' Like a Villain, our Medicine Wheel line. There's all kinds of great products out there now that are child safe, tested. You know, the dosing is what it say it is on it. We test a lot of black market products. Most of them are half of what is actually supposed to be in it. The products that we sell have the Red Feather certification on it, and those products test as the label says, so it's very accurate. And again, it's creating a lot of nation-to-nation trading. And that led me into the path of what I call red road trading. So this was a wholesale network that we developed that is strictly Indigenous products. It's not just our products. We try to get reputable Indigenous products into this network with us, and then basically we supply other Indigenous dispensaries with these products. So that's been going very well. And the professionalism, the connections, the support from community has all been building since we opened in 2017. And all you have to do is go to Alderville, go down the Green Mile, it's called. I think there's about 13, 14, or 15 Indigenous dispensaries there, and you can start seeing the benefits that it's having for our community. I believe it's probably touched every single person in our community. You see new gas stations going up, you see people building nicer houses, driving nicer vehicles, and a lot of it is attributed because of the cannabis industry. So, there was a lot of stigma at first, there was some hesitancy. Band councils, a lot of band councils were against it or not sure on it, which, being part of the Canadian government, we can understand their hesitancy. Of course, a lot of the funding and stuff comes from the government as well. But, we're starting to see this more and more where band councils and traditional councils are definitely becoming supportive of cannabis. Our own chief and council have said that they will protect the cannabis industry in our community. They personally see the benefits. And we're starting to see that. And what we're doing here, what AJ is doing here, and what Tom and Chief Riley have been doing is basically we're spreading our wings. We're extending our reach to our traditional territories and using our rights to be able to do that. I think that's kind of all I want to say, but I will kind of lead off that, what we got to look at is our rights. Basically, we got to look at them like our children. We got to protect them. When you hold your children, you coddle them, you hold them close. Every time the government steps in to do something, we accept a hand from the government, we're reaching our hand out, we're losing that grip on our future. We got to keep our hands in tight and protect our future and our future generations. This is why we're doing this. We're doing this to help our people, to uplift our people, and to educate non-Indigenous to our cultures and build that reconciliation and, again, kind of bridge that gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anthony John Tenasco. I'm Algonquin from Kitigan-Zibi, and I'd like to say thank you to Chief Riley for getting Section 25 and 35 in the Constitution, because that gives us the opportunity to operate here and do business and make medicine more accessible and more affordable for the community, and we get to help more people. If it wasn't for that, this would not be possible today. So I'm very grateful for that, and I would like to thank my team, Rob, Tom, Tashana, and Jack, and if it wasn't for these guys, none of this is possible. Together, we united, and we made this possible, and we're going to continue to unite and bring people in and grow. This is just the beginning. We're looking to grow communities, create more jobs, and help as many people as we possibly can. It's unfortunate that some people that did have a part of this are unable to be here, but I would like to thank them as well, and they know who they are. And the experience here in Ottawa has been, I'd like to talk about that for the next couple minutes here. It's been great. It's been amazing, the support that we receive from the community here. It's awesome. They thank us for being here. They don't have to drive an hour to a reservation to get the proper medicine that they need, because they can't get it at the OCS stores because the government's regulating everything. So they thank us. I have elders from my community who used to be against cannabis. Now they're 100% for it, coming to me asking me for CBD to help them get off their pain pills that the doctors have them on. And it's awesome. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to help people and also give back to our communities and help the elders and the youth, you know, because this isn't about me. It's about everybody else and helping and all of us coming together and helping each other and uniting and reconciliation, you know. There's been a lot of issues throughout the years here in Canada with Indigenous people and the white people and racism and just everything. It's very sad and it's nice to be able to do business with the other races and we all come together and unite, and that's one of the best things. And the jobs that we're creating, we don't only hire Indigenous, we hire other races as well, and bring them into work to help that reconciliation and to help unite us and to show, hey, we're not racist. We want to all do this together and help one another. So that's what we've been doing, and the service that we're providing to the community is exceptional. We do everything that other stores can't do. They wish that they could. When people come in our store, we want to know what they're there for and how we could help them, and they love it. And the best part about it is everyone who comes to our door comes back. It's because that's what it's about. It's not about just that one time. It's about the long-term relationship and the longevity and being consistent and doing the right things. When I chose to partner with Medicine Wheel, it was the move because they do everything right, and I like that. And the people who I'm in business with, we all have to do everything right because we're representations of each other. And we're not going to, and it's nice to know that the people I'm in business with, none of us are going to do anything to tarnish our name or the brand or ruin anything that we have going on. I'm confident that I could tell anybody to go to anywhere, any store and buy our product, send it to any lab, and it's going to be accurate as to what's on the packaging. It's such a blessing. So that's why I chose to partner with Medicine Wheel, and we're going to grow this, and we're going to continue to do good things for people all over Canada. I'm working with people back home in KZ who want to bring their products to the marketplace. That's huge, you know. We're looking to partner with people from KZ who want to open stores. You know, that's huge. You know, it's great, and you know, I'd just like to thank everybody again for coming and for this opportunity. I'm very grateful, and I look forward to all the lives that we're able to impact and help improve. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, everybody. We'll now turn to the question and answer portion. So if you guys have a question or thought or something you want to share with us, you just raise your hand or stand up and sing, whatever you want to say. Yes, go ahead.
Is section 25 and 35 protect us from our own council?
You'll have to say it a little louder. My hearing.
25 or 35 protect us from our own council and chief?
It sure does. Their total authority is within the confines of the Indian Act, except if they step out of that, as an individual, they have the Aboriginal treaty rights, but not as a council. And then the other problem the councils have is they're also a corporate body, and they're not an Indian. there's a lot of problems with that. Even though they've been handling land, they're a corporation, you know, and that's crazy. So the answer to your question is 35 and 25, euchre them outright. And you know, I'm surprised people haven't challenged the Indian Act under Section 35 and 25 yet, but eventually it'll happen, and you could probably knock out all the sections of the Indian Act, or most of the sections.
So what's holding up, like, the courts now with all the cases they got with all the dispensaries that have been charged, and there's been on charges for 4 years? You know what I mean? Like, what's
Okay, yeah,
holding that- like, what's preventing that from moving forward? Like, say, you know, like, I'm part of a big group of dispensaries that all been going to court for 4 years, you know what I mean, fighting and exhausting money. So what's holding that up from moving forward? Like, what are they waiting on?
yeah.
Are they waiting for some kind of law to be passed, or are they waiting on what? You know what I mean? I just don't understand why it's dragged out so long.
Yeah, I think we're not going to get any place under the chief and council regime because they're totally controlled by the minister, and they're only responsible to the minister and not to the people. You probably won't see much change at all come through them because all they have is their budgets coming in and locked doors are around them. So.
I don't really want change from them, like the courts, what's holding the court up for making a decision, for making a legal decision on these dispensaries that are
Yeah,
still
yeah.
all in line up to go to Supreme Court or wherever courts they're going to.
Okay, you've got, courts have a big problem in that if they're a province, the 1888 St. Catharines milling case, the feds give the provinces the First Nations resources in your treaty areas, which is invalid anyway. And we just haven't really challenged that. But if you take that to a provincial court, the provincial court will rule in favor of the province, and that's been happening, you know. And but we've got to you've got to take it to the federal level if you want to make any headway there. But it's still a long road. It's not going to be easy.
I could give a little bit of information on some of the court cases and what's happening, and there is coverage of there's 10 Anishinaabe dispensary owners that are in a court case together along the north shore of Lake Huron, and essentially what's happened is that the government has very much stalled in every part of the process, and the people, some of the store owners, or at least one of them, shut down his business because of fears and threats, and so he's been very vocal about how this has ruined his life and been a terrible thing. And meanwhile, he sees a dozen other dispensaries in his own home community that are back open, and yet he's on charges, or he can't do that. So it's been very difficult. Meanwhile, for most of the other people that have been charged, they've continued their participation in the cannabis industry, and the kind of politics have changed, especially since Chief Riley began going around and explaining the rights. A lot of the we had a meeting with the OPP and the Anishinaabe police services sometime pre-COVID, maybe 2019, and after that meeting, because they have a fiduciary responsibility to uphold the Crown's relationship with First Nations people. And when that gets pointed out to them, and all the sort of political and legal matters get pointed out, they realize this is not worth, getting involved with or raiding, people. And especially because most of these raids turn out to actually be politically motivated, because one faction in chief and council is trying to, take out somebody else. So, but having said that, the Crown in this, in the case with the 10 Anishinaabe dispensaries, tried to get the constitutional questions thrown out. There were originally 4 constitutional questions that were kind of brought together, and they managed to throw out 3 of the 4, with the only one left standing, the Section 25 and 35 argument. And then when they weren't able to get that thrown out, they asked for a 1-year recess so they could go and do their homework. And this also reminds me, and this has been happening in Mi'kmaq territory as well. Albert Marshall in Eskasoni had the RCMP raid his store. They took everything. They took him out of business. Then when it got to court, he involved Chief Riley as one of his expert witnesses. And within 3 days of Chief Riley joining the case, when it came time for the court, the RCMP refused to show up to court. And they said, no, we're not coming. And the judge and the Crown were upset, but they had to cancel the case. And so charges were dropped. However, Mr. Marshall did not get his product back. Then, maybe about a month or two later, the RCMP detachment came to him and said, we're going to shut you down again unless you can prove authorization, that you have authorization to open a dispensary and to do this. And he said, well, Chief Riley wrote a letter back and explained it all, and also said, if you're so concerned about this, why did you drop the charges from last time? The RCMP claimed they never received the letter and raided the shop again a few weeks later, again cleaned him out, and now they're right back in the court system. But I think there's been at least half a dozen cases that Chief Riley has come on to help people, and the Crown has just dropped the charges rather than they don't want to hear from somebody who was there in the early 1980s making these constitutional additions and knowing the exact context and having the experience of all of his elders behind him. So, I mean, the answer is that, and this is admitted by one of the police officers, is, well, we're just trying to slow them down. We know we don't have the right to stop them, but we'll raid them, take their money, take their product, drag it into the court process, and it'll slow them down. So that's the best that I can say to that.
And now we're going to start to sue them.
In Sudbury, that's where we're all from. We had a dispensary that tried to open up in downtown Sudbury, and they basically lasted 2 weeks. I don't know if you talk unseated, does an area have to be unseated to be able to push the rights that way, or can it be anywhere?
The same rights apply everywhere. This is one thing about the treaties. In that area, of course, it's Robinson Heron. There's a lot of things that aren't in your treaty because the treaties are really it's just an introduction between two nations, and you never got into details of, well, hey, I own this, and this is the way I make laws, and but all your rights are intact, and you also have all of the rights that might be explained in other treaties, other areas. For instance, the early Mi'kmaq treaties said they had the right to build truck houses, which are stores, and they could sell any one of their products, any place in the whole treaty area. Well, you have the same rights. They can't deny you that. But even better than that, you have the Rowan Proclamation, which said that you're totally tax-free in all of Upper Canada, which is all of Ontario. Well, actually now, and this right would apply all across Canada as well. So there's a lot of rights that aren't necessarily mentioned in your treaties, but you can pull them out from here and there, and they're yours. The same as the Mi'kmaq truck houses would be yours too. So yeah, but well, if you're going to do it, you're probably best to. Well, we're probably the only ones that can give you the proper advice and put together the right kind of documentation so that when they look at it, holy shit. Yeah. And that's what happens. So.
Yeah, if I can just, do you mind closing the door back there? We're just getting a lot of noise in there. But just to speak to the Sudbury question and what's different, the strategy that we've been using has been to go directly to the police officers, the police station, the city hall, and to show up with a letter from Chief Del Riley, former national chief, who's put 2 sections in the Constitution. The letter explains what the rights are and consists of an invitation to come and sit down and talk about the matter. There's a rights issue at stake, there's a constitutional issue at stake, and we're very public about doing that. And so then there's also, we'll make videos to put out on social media or to put out on the websites of the businesses. We sent a press release earlier this week to every media outlet in the National Capital Region and every Indigenous media outlet across Canada, informing them of what was happening. Now, unfortunately, in Ottawa, it doesn't seem that people work on Fridays past noon. We didn't maybe know that.
They're out
enough.
golfing.
They're off on such a lovely day. But the point is to be open and forthright, and to begin a negotiation, a discussion about what the rights are and about how to resolve problems. And this was also something that actually happened with the very first Indigenous dispensary that opened, Legacy 420 in Tyendinaga, Mohawk Territory, and the very first Anishinaabe dispensary, Medicine Wheel Natural Healing with Rob. We actually went to the Northumberland OPP detachment together and delivered a letter and said, this is what we're informing you, this is what we're doing. We're letting you know that we're taking these steps around health and safety and that there is no organized crime involved, and here's our number. Rob said we'd love to meet with you. And the police, got in touch, and 2 or 3 weeks later had a meeting in Alderville, and essentially their issues were the health and safety of the product and basically public safety. And Rob was able to explain and assure them of the steps that were being taken. And they knew that there was a rights issue involved, and they also knew that their problems as police officers were not coming from the cannabis plant. There were many other more destructive things going on that were causing them problems. So as a result, there's been not a single raid on any of the Alderville dispensaries since this happened. And this is what's happening now in terms of moving to unceded territories in cities. Has been part of that, and with the exception of Sudbury, none of these places have been raided. And there's now 25 Indigenous sovereign Indigenous dispensaries in downtown Toronto. They are the biggest retail outlets together are the Indigenous stores, and there's 2 stores in London, a store in Moncton, one in Hamilton, and many others that are popping up all over the place. So it's a very interesting time that we're in.
So why is Sudbury the exception then, Tom?
Well, he never did that. He never brought a letter.
Go through the process.
No, he just opened up the shop and took his chances.
Yeah, this letter also puts them on notice that these are their rights. If you do anything to violate them, you are liable. And so that's the real, or one of the very important reasons for the letter done that way. Lawyers can't do this.
Go ahead, Nisha. You had a question from you there, Nisha?
I have, okay, so I wanted to, okay, I'll start first of all. I wanted to say I'm really happy to see you all here, because you know what, I was there when you guys first started, at Legacy 420, and even, Medicine Wheel and stuff, so I'm really happy to see you guys are still open and fully functional and not raided and, shut down. I think that's really awesome. I think it's really awesome that thinking about, I don't think it was fair that they were targeting me because I smoke cannabis for my pain. But I wanted to also include that in my lawsuit against Children's Aid Society and the Ottawa General Hospital, because I actually filed suit against them. So I wanted to include that because they targeted me because of my cannabis usage, and I don't think that's right, because I use it as a medicine for myself. And I think there's a lot of that happening in this country. So I'm just one person that was targeted, and I brought light to it in the media about a couple months ago. But I just wanted to say that there should be a legal team to protect like mothers who are giving birth, because they will target us, and they will try to take our babies because of the marijuana. So and another question is that a lot of the dispensaries in Ottawa only sell 10 milligrams for their edibles. I'm just wondering, do we have to follow that in Ottawa, or can I just go to Medicine Wheel and
Go to his place.
Yeah, we currently have all kinds of different dosage amounts. I think the highest right now is was it 500 or 1,000? 500 milligrams, I think.
No, I got 1,000 milligram
milligrams,
chocolate
yeah.
bars and gummies.
here it's just 10, and I'm like, no.
Yeah, come see us. And we're open till 11.
Well, okay, well, do you guys deliver?
Yep.
There we go, all right. Okay, well, thank you so much.
You got you.
Will you be having a lounge around your place, tables?
I have the tables out, and you could come and hang out and drink coffee, but unfortunately you cannot smoke in front of the building. Yeah, they're
Parks and Beachwood.
yeah, there's a park right next door. I don't care if you go smoke on the sidewalk. There's bus stops right there. You just can't sit in chairs in front of a building and smoke because the bylaws. We got to make sure that we're doing things right and abide by the bylaws. Not at that location, but we are opening other locations, and that is something that I'm definitely, it's going to happen. I don't know about there, but I know that we're gonna have a lounge of some sort where people could come and hang out and smoke, probably inside though.
Yeah. Oh, another question.
Go ahead.
Because we're not from this territory, like I'm from up north of Ontario, does it make a difference? And like us as Indigenous women, open a shop on our own here, or do we have to go through your territory to get permission and go through the whole protocol and permission and all that?
That's for Chief Riley.
Unless you get, you get permission from your elders, but I wouldn't deal with the chief and councils there, because they don't know anyway. Most of them have no clue of their rights. And, well, if you have any kind of specific questions, hell, I can pen down the answers for you pretty quick. And if you are having problems with somebody, let me know.
Open up a store like that? As in, can you open up a store? That's the question. Can you?
Just gotta do it.
Just do it. Yeah.
Don't ask no permission from the band.
Yeah. No, you can set up, well, you talk to one of your traditional people there. They'll give you the okay. That's all you need.
I know I can do it up north, I can
Yeah.
do it in my own territory, but that's like cost to look out.
Yeah, well, if you're in somebody else's territory, you know, the protocol is, you get their permission.
Do the waters flow towards James Bay, or do they flow into the Great Lakes?
They go James Bay and then Great Lakes.
Yeah, because a lot of the stores that have opened in Ontario they're operating under the 1701 treaty and the Beaver Bowl treaty, which is the watershed that flows into the Great Lakes region. So technically, I think you're just on the edge where it flows into James Bay. So that according to that agreement and the sharing of the Beaver Bowl, it's basically by watershed. So you probably would need to go and
Hey, to make
talk to Anthony's people and the people in the particular territory and see if you could come up with something that's mutually beneficial.
In Saugeen or here?
No, in here, right? In Saugeen, it's a whole different thing, but it's all with where you are in terms of the waters. All right, are there any further questions or any statements, or should we wrap things up? Does anybody want to say any last words from the panel?
Well, the only thing I can say is we're forging ahead, you know, and we're always hitting rough waters, but we're getting there.
Okay, and the videos and the recordings and an article about all of this will be on dispensingfreedom.com and also posted on medicinewheel.ca. And there'll be lots more of this to come in the future. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.